Hello, and welcome back to Purpose Driven, Vision Inspired, the podcast where we explore the deeper reasons behind why we do what we do and how we align our daily actions with our long term visions. I'm your host, Richard Cerna, the performance strategist, and today we're going to dive into a topic that every single one of us has encountered, probably more than we'd actually like to admit. That's failure, right? So, in this episode titled Embracing Failure and Turning Setbacks into Stepping Stones, we're going to explore how failure actually can be one of the most powerful forces driving us towards success. And I'm personally going to share some reflections, examples, if you will, from myself, my past experiences, and other practical steps that you can take to start seeing your failures as opportunities. As some of you have seen in the first few episodes, I do like to bring people onto the show. However, I wanted to open myself up here to show that I am a real person and I do lead with purpose. I didn't want to bring somebody on this show for this episode specifically because this is not one where I want to look at somebody else. I want to give you a live example of my own experiences. So here we go. I want to start out by sharing that failure is not the end. It's part of our journey. And I'll add to that by sharing a personal story. And what that story is it's actually a failure that I had early on in my career. It has to do with after I left a major auto manufacturing company and joined another company in 2008. I was riding high, thought that I had, all my ducks in a row. I thought nobody could teach me anything. And I had joined a gaming company that was responsible for the marketing and selling gaming consoles. And they even refurbished. And the role that I took was called a software refurbishing supervisor. And I had a shift of about 128 people. I can't remember the exact number, but I was a very letter of the law type person. And if I saw an opening, then I would be selfishly ambitious and I would take advantage of that opening. And while working for this company, I was also pursuing my licenses to become an insurance agent. And I'll never forget that in the employee handbook, there was no set policy that said that you could not have a job outside of working for this company. And I'd had several meetings with my director and the VP regarding my interest in getting my licenses. And they gave me fair opportunity. They actually uh, indirectly tried to convince me not to pursue. However, I wanted to pursue my path or what I thought was my path at the time. And essentially, um, I threw the policy in their face, thinking that nothing was going to happen from it, right? And lo and behold, I got walked out a few days later and I was terminated from employment. That was humbling because in all my time in my professional career, my short career at that time, I'd come to the sense of as long as I'm right, that's all that matters, and I'm going to pursue what I want. Well, that was my first failure, was being thick-headed, thick-skulled, whatever you want to call it. But what I took from that was there's plenty of opportunity to pause and reflect whenever you have any type of scenario, regardless of the scenario. You want to apply what I call the 10-second rule. I don't know what the formal name of it is, but essentially what the 10-second rule is anytime you come into duress or a difficult interaction or difficult situation or conversation, when you are being provoked, take a beat, count from 10 down to 1 silently in your head, and make eye contact with the person you're engaging. That does two things. It allows you to gather your thoughts, retain your power, and for three things. think from a new perspective. Had I not gone through that experience, that short-term loss, I don't even like to call it a failure, I would have never learned how to apply this 10-second rule where it would desperately be needed later on in my career. I've shared that story. Um, I've shared that story in other podcasts, and I'll spare you the details here. However, the application of that 10-second rule is very powerful. And the fact that I learned it from a failure and I learned how to gather and collect myself, conduct myself, it it paid dividends down the road. One thing that I do want to share is that at the time, I thought that that failure it defined me. Uh, it felt like a dead end. I had accumulated some savings, and I had left one company and gone to another, and I was having trouble launching my insurance agency, as I mentioned, and I thought the world was going to end because, oh no, I'm a business owner and I have to make my own money. Well, at the time, I didn't know how to make money. But looking back, that so-called failure, it ended up being one of the most valuable experiences of my life. And I'll go on to share more about that in future podcasts as we dive deeper, as we bring on special guests. But I don't want to get stuck too long on that, my personal story, as much as I'd like to dive into the mindset shift that we need to all step into when it comes to failure. I want to say, or I want to lead by saying that the key is redefining what failure actually means. Um, Rather than see it as an end, we need to view it as feedback. Every time we fail, uh, we're not just learning something new about ourselves. We're learning about a process, a way that we interpret and receive data, ingest it, respond to it, and about what it takes to succeed. So if you're like me, you've had many of scenarios or many of times where you failed or you've ran into a wall that's thicker that you can run through. But I guarantee you, you've been able to dust yourself off, get back up, and go back at it again. And that's the kind of mindset shift that we really need to embody. It's critical. Again, embracing failure is not for the faint at heart. It's for those that are constantly looking to fulfill their purpose, looking to transcend their current self, and looking to help those and serve those in their community, help those around them. So I want to quickly, uh, think about some of the most successful people in history. People like Thomas Edison, who famously said, "I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work." That's pretty interesting, right? When you think about it, 10,000 ways. Now, imagine if he quit at the 9,999th time. Yeah, the world would eventually have produced light bulbs. However, in Thomas Edison's perspective, trying 10,000 different ways or failing 10,000 different ways led to an ultimate discovery and invention that he's credited for. And that totally changed his life. Another way or another person that comes to mind is J.K. Rowling. J.K. was rejected by 12 publishers before Harry Potter was finally accepted. And when you look at it from that perspective, you think, wow, Harry Potter generated billions of dollars, and the success, when it boils down to it, was built on a foundation of failure. So no matter where you're at in life, don't let failure pin you down. Don't let failure bury you. Reflect on any time you trip, you stumble, you fall. Gather yourself, collect yourself, compose yourself, and get back up and get into the fight. So in terms of fight, right? Some people are fearful of, fighting. I know I don't like to fight. And not just in the literal sense of the word. We do what we have to do in life, but the mental battle is where I'm really going with this. And when we think about why we actually fear failure, we need to understand why the fear of failure can help us overcome challenges that we're faced with, obstacles that we come across in life. And part of that has to do with the fear of judgment. And I really want to talk about why we fear failure first. One of the biggest reasons is the fear of judgment. What others will think of us when we fall short. We live in a world where success is celebrated and failure is often hidden. And that can make it feel even more isolating. Just think about social media today. All you ever see is the person's best picture, when they're in the best shape of their lives, when they're on vacation doing something that they normally don't do, when they're celebrating ABC, and not when they're tripping over XYZ. You only see the good. And it makes me think of insurance. So many people will be quick to give a negative review when they have an issue with a claim, but they will completely forget to praise the insurance company when they come through and they totally replace, let's say their house was totally destroyed or burned down, or their vehicle was stolen, or one of their children got hurt in during a sporting event, and insurance was able to come through. People don't think about those things. They don't. All they think about is the negative. And if I flip the script there, whenever people post on social media, they're not going to tell you how they're really feeling. They're going to show you a picture of everybody smiling and everybody's hunky-dory. I'm not telling you to go and start posting all your bad drama and whatnot on social media. Please don't do that. What I'm trying to do is frame the reality of it's not, how do I say this? The fear of judgment, you can't control what you don't know. The fear of judgment has everything to do with anticipating what might happen. Throw that garbage out the window, friends. Throw it out the window and move forward. Another reason that we fear failure is perfectionism. I mean, sometimes we set impossibly high standards for ourselves, and when we don't meet them, we feel like we failed completely. But the truth is, perfection isn't a goal. Progress is. Remember, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes better. And we will never be perfect. Not in this physical body that we have, at least. Lastly, when it comes to why we fear failure, it's because it impacts us emotionally. It can feel like a hit to our self-esteem and can make us question our abilities. But what if we started seeing failure as something to be embraced, not feared? Now, that's a deep question, and I challenge you to really think about the emotional impact and the level of self-esteem that you can gain by facing your fears, by facing that fear of failure and breaking through that wall, breaking through that barrier, and seeing that what's on the other side of it is actually beautiful. I want to shift gears a little bit because we've talked about the fear of failure, but I want to turn the tide some, and I want to look at how we transition setbacks into stepping stones. We spent a little bit of time on the fear of failure and how to break through that, but it's important to be able to turn that failure into growth. The first step to turning failure into a stepping stone is reflection. I talk about the man in the mirror all the time. That's specific to me, the man in the mirror. I have to face that man in the mirror every day. And that's because I want to live a life of constant improvement. I want to live a life of integrity. I want to be able to rest my head on my pillow at night knowing that I put my best foot forward. It's important that we reflect and we don't dwell on these things. And instead of dwelling on the mistake or the setback, you need to ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What went wrong? And what can I do differently next time? As I mentioned earlier, that learning experience that I had, that failure where I got walked out the door, it taught me quite a bit. It taught me to get over myself, one, and it taught me to pause and not respond emotionally. It taught me to gather my thoughts, to to speak logically and intelligently. I want to point out that failure, it offers us insights that success often doesn't. I mean, when things are going easy, that's when we get lazy, right? There's a saying, uh, tough times create great men create good times create weak men. I could be butchering that, but there's so much truth to that. When things are going great, you often don't think about where you can constantly improve. And from another personal experience, I've seen that firsthand in the oil and gas industry. When back before COVID, when times were good, we were looking at $100 a barrel, and you're thinking about what tool can we bring in next, where can we innovate that, where can we do this, where can we do that, and you were just spin, spin, spin. You weren't thinking about building for the future. And yes, a large company will think for the future, but it wasn't as big a deal as it was once the pandemic hit us. And when you saw 5 consecutive quarters of loss in a row, it was, oh my goodness, the sky is falling. We need to learn from where we were wasting all this money, and times got tough. And that's what ultimately made that company much stronger, much more effective, and a staple in the marketplace. The next thing that we need to do is we need to take action. Resilience is built not by avoiding failure, but by continuing to move forward despite it. Every time that you get back up after falling, you're growing stronger. I'll tell you what, I've got bumps, bruises, scars, mental, physical, you name it. But what has it built? It's built resilience. Resilience doesn't come from avoiding challenges. It doesn't come from avoiding what is causing you to be so fearful and frightful. It's time for you to change your inner dialogue. Our inner dialogue it's incredibly powerful. If we constantly tell ourselves we're failures, guess what? It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if we start to see ourselves as learners, as people who are constantly growing through our mistakes, well, we'll become more resilient over time. That reminds me of, habits when it comes to playing the game of baseball. I learned a long time ago that in order to break a bad habit in your swing, it takes about 10,000 swings, batting practice, quality swings, mind you. You don't want to burn out. You don't want to wear yourself out because you'll create more bad habits. But the interesting part of that is once you correct a habit, it only takes one swing of the bat off balanced to create a new bad habit. So just remember, as people who are constantly growing through our mistakes, we'll become more resilient over time. Nothing ever becomes easy to do. There's always going to be a level of discomfort. But if you can get comfortable being uncomfortable, you will see tremendous growth in your life. Now, there's an African proverb that says, how do you eat an elephant? And that's one bite at a time, right? Well, if the fear of failure feels too big to handle, well, it's time to start breaking it down in smaller parts. Everything can be broken down. And if you look at each aspect and you tackle them one at a time, sometimes even though failure feels overwhelming and it can look like a giant, when you break it down, it becomes more manageable. And maybe that's just my perspective, right? Because as an IT professional, former IT professional, I was always looking at how can I break things down to fix and get to the root cause of something. But you have to affect a mind shift in yourself, regardless of your profession, regardless of where you're at in your life. It's critically important to break down the challenges that have you sitting so fearful in the corner of a room. You got to change your inner dialogue. And remember, resilience, it only comes through action, through facing the challenges that have you fearful. So I want to talk a little bit about practical steps, right? What are some of the things that we can do to embrace failure? Because let's face it, embracing failure is like giving a bear hug to a cactus. It's oftentimes it's painful, right? Now, if you work on embracing failure and making it a habit, it's not ever going to feel comforting like a cooling pillow, but you are going to develop thick skin, right? And I don't want to talk about literally hugging a cactus, but figuratively. The more often you address your fear of failure by taking chances, by diving headfirst in, and by reflecting, the less fearful of a life you're going to live. Remember, making it a point to recognize that failure is normal. It's just part of who we are. We are imperfect. We are human. So take some time, talk about your failures with trusted friends or even mentors. And remember that the more you accept it, the less power it has over you. Remember, I always talk about retaining your power, holding on to your power, not giving it away to other people. Well, it's not just people that you can give your power away to. You can also give your power away to the fear of failure. You have something great in you. Use it. Learn from the mistakes we make, right? The second thing that I want to talk about in terms of how you can embrace failure, first, you need to normalize it, like I just said. The second thing you need to do is you need to reframe your setbacks. And remember, when something goes wrong, immediately ask, what can I learn from this? This reframing, it can shift your perspective from negative to positive really quickly. Now, the next thing, the third step that we can do is we can celebrate the small wins. Don't just focus on your failures. You got to celebrate the small wins along the way, because if you don't, you are going to live in the gap. You want to live in the gain by celebrating your small wins along the way, not resting on your laurels, but celebrating. Take a second to look back and see where you came from. Now, I mentioned The Gap and the Gain, and that's a reference to The Gap and the Gain, the book by Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. It's a great book. And when it comes to celebrating your small wins, part of living in the gain means that you are not always looking at the failures and only focusing on, oh, well, I accomplished this, but I could have done this much better. No, it's not just about that. It's not about that, actually. You need to look and celebrate where you have come from, because I guarantee you, if you take a step back or you turn around and you look at where you've come from in your journey, you will see the ups, the downs, the lateral moves, every move that you've made, and you can shift that perspective of what those outcomes mean and how they've helped you become the person you are today. So you got to reframe your setbacks. You got to celebrate your small wins. And the main thing that you really need to do, I can't stress how important this is you've got to build a support system around you. You've got to surround yourself with people who understand the value of failure. You have to have a support system that encourages growth rather than perfection. Knowing that will help you navigate setbacks more easily. I can't tell you how much more my life has improved since surrounding myself with like-minded people, like-minded brothers, like-minded men that are seeking constant improvement. That doesn't mean that we're perfectionists. It means that we're not afraid to try something new. It means we're not afraid to lead from the front. It means we're not afraid. We don't have a fear of trying or reaching for something higher than we've ever reached for before. Why? Because that's going to help us learn. That's going to help me learn more about myself. It's going to help me apply those learnings. It's going to help me be more confident about standing up and dusting myself off and diving right back into action. Now, I've been talking your ear off for almost half an hour. So I really want to summarize some key points here, right? So just remember, failure is not the end. It is part of your journey. It offers valuable feedback. It builds resilience, and it can actually push you closer to your ultimate success, whatever that may be. By reflecting on your setbacks, though, you'll be able to take action. You'll be able to reframe how you view failure, and you can turn those obstacles into stepping stones. Remember, every time you fail, you're one step closer to success. So embrace it, learn from it, and grow from it. Hey, listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Purpose Driven, Vision Inspired. If today's episode resonated with you, I encourage you to take a moment and reflect on how you've handled failure in your own life. I know for me, not only has it created a lot of gray hairs in my beard, but it's added a lot of wrinkles to my brain. And I can't stress how grateful I am to have lived the life that I've lived and to embrace everything that I've gone through, the successes, the failures, the multiple failures, the thousands of failures. But it's made me who I am today. And it's given me the courage to step out and to share my voice with you here on this podcast. Now, what do you believe it can do for you? If you believe it can help somebody else, I ask that you please share it with somebody who might need this message. You never know. Just sometimes I've been told, smiling at people might change the outcome of their life. Well, maybe somebody's stuck in a rut and they need some motivational words. They need to hear a message. They need this message. So remember, I'm your host, Richard Cerna, the performance strategist. And until next time, stay purpose driven, stay inspired, and keep turning those failures into stepping stones, my friends.